In agrarian Europe, people usually married late but bore children rapidly. Children often had several siblings. If a couple were married for 15 years, it was not uncommon to have 6 or more children. These children entered a dangerous world characterized by poor living standards. 1 out of 5 children were almost guaranteed to die, and in poor areas, 1 in 3 was likely to die. These sick children almost always died of the diseases they caught, as little could be done for them. Those who survived have to endure a troubling childhood because of the neglect and abuse by parents and peers. Schools were secondary in the lives of the common people. Most children never learned to read or write. However, basic literacy still grew over this time period. The frequency of reading and the types of literature read also differed between social classes.
During this time, women of the lower classes usually breastfed their infants for a longer period of time than is more customary today. But breastfeeding decreases the likelihood of pregnancy, and by nursing their babies, they spaced their children apart by 2 or 3 years. Also, nursing saved lives because when an infant is breastfed, it receives precious immunity-producing substances from the mother's milk and are more likely to survive.
However, upper-class women felt that breastfeeding was crude, common, and undignified, so instead of breastfeeding their children, they would hire a wet nurse. Wet nurses were common women that would nurse babies for 2 to 3 years in place of the child's upper or middle-class mother. Working-class women would also hire wet nurses in order to facilitate full-time work in the shop. Wet nurses were often observed to be negligent and unloving of a child. Some claimed that certain nurses were killing nurses, with whom no child ever survived.
In the ancient world, it was not uncommon to allow or force newborn babies, particularly girl babies, to die when the family became too big. This was mainly due to the influence by Jewish law. Later down the road, the willful destruction of a newborn became a crime punishable by death, but it still continued. Parents started to overlay on the infants, in which the parents would roll over on top of the infant. In 1784, suspicious authorities made it illegal for parents to take children under the age of 5 into bed with them. Abortions were also legal during this time. Children were also abandoned during this time. They were mainly placed at doorsteps of churches and homes. But by the 18th century, about 10,000 children were abandoned, and nearly all of them were infants. Also during this time, even in the best of the homes, 50% normally died within a year, and in worst, 90% fully did not survive.
Because of high infant mortality rates, physicians and clergymen exhorted parents to avoid emotional attachment to their children. So many babies died, and there was so little treatment for them, that parents and doctors alike had no hope for new babies. As a result, many parents would detach themselves from, neglect, and sometimes even abuse their children, which didn't help the babies' already low survival rates, 80% for the wealthy ones and as low as 65% for the more unfortunate. Parents often only paid attention to their children when they were disciplining them. Children were taught to be obedient and hardworking by being beaten and forced to work. This treatment was not limited to the lower classes, as all children, even wealthy ones, were neglected. Although this practice was quite widespread at the time, it had its critics, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He condemned wet nursing and encouraged greater love and care for all children. Common society followed Rousseau's advice, and by the end of the 18th century, parents gave their children more attention, love, and care, and even enjoyed bringing up their children. This change reflected the Enlightenment ideals of humanitarianism and optimism about the potential of humanity.
As the 17th and 18th centuries progressed, elementary education in schools played a larger role in children's lives. In these schools, boys and girls from ages 7 to 12 were taught the basics of religion and literacy. Literacy rates grew fastest in areas that were on the border of Catholic and Protestant states, because the churches often used reading to enforce their teachings. Prussia was Europe's leader for universal education. In 1717, Prussia made elementary school attendance mandatory. In England, the Anglican Church established many charity schools to educate poor children. In 1682, French Christian schools were set up to teach religion, reading, and writing to children. These efforts in elementary education resulted in a significant rise in popular literacy between the 17th and 19th centuries. By 1800, more than half of English males were literate. Women's literacy rates increased as well, but they usually lagged a considerable amount behind men. As European literacy rates grew, the Bible was still the overwhelming favorite of the common reader, but popular literature also expanded to include other genres, such as chapbooks. Chapbooks were short, cheaply printed pamphlets that dealt with religious subjects, such as devotions, prayers, or Bible stories. These books supplied the reader with daily moral lessons and a confidence in God. Another kind of popular literature at the time were fairy tales. These stories featured magic, heroes, and a classic good versus evil storyline. Almanacs were also a hot item for the common reader. These were practical calendars for daily living that were filled with advice, how-tos on household repairs and crafts, random facts, and jokes. They were highly entertaining and non-controversial, and were read by the upper and lower classes alike. Usually, however, popular literature differed from the books read by the upper classes in practicality and simplicity. Peasant readers wanted material that was easy to understand and apply to daily life, unless it was a fairy tale. The common reader loved the fantastical stories for their escapist qualities. They took the reader to a place where good triumphed over evil and where right would always win.